couple of years ago. I just had this 2 weeks ago when I was flying to that rally. So the same guy that flew me to the rally 2 weeks ago, he had a plane. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago this story happened. He has a little 4-seater plane, and he asked me. He's one of my balabatim. He says, "Rabbi, do you want to go flying?" I was like, "Sure, why not?" He said, "I'll take you around the CN Tower." So I meet him at this little airport in Waterloo, and we come up to this plane, and we get in, and he sits there, and I had my 2 younger girls, who are my oldest now, but they were sitting in the back of the plane. It was a little 4-seater, and we're taxiing, take off, and of course, I'm saying Tefillah Sederach. It was like a really small plane, really short runway, not a lot of time to say it, but before we know it, we're up in the air, and he's doing the whole cross-check thing, whatever, clear for takeoff, all that stuff, right? We get up, we take off. And within like 30 seconds of flying, and it's a really, really small plane. I don't know if you've been in a really, really small plane. You feel everything. It's not like, it's not like, the flight attendant walks in and time for drink. Like, there's nowhere to go. Okay. And 30 seconds up in the air. And he's like, he says, "Did you feel that?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "That." I'm like, "No." He's like, "Okay." And he gets on he says, "Control tower, this is, whatever, F Zulu 9er." He says, "We're requesting permission for emergency landing." And I'm like, emergency landing? I'm like, Shema Yisrael. I didn't realize this was how it would end. I was really like, it was very intense. And he turns the plane around, and within like 30 seconds, he's got us back heading towards the runway, and we do an emergency landing. And I remember when we get out of the plane, he felt so bad. "I'm so sorry." I said, no, don't worry about it. It's all good. It's all good. He says, no, please, you wait in the plane. He says, "I'm going to see if I can get us another plane. Maybe there's another plane that I can take up." I was like, no, it's okay. It's fine. That was enough. I had my experience. Anyway, we wait in the crash landing plane, and he goes off, and I see him inspecting another plane, and then I see another inspector, another Dayan, another Rav, all these inspectors coming out from the airport, and they're all inspecting the propeller of this plane. Eventually he comes back, he says, "I feel so bad. Even that plane I can't take up. There's a whatever issue." I said, "That's fine. Don't worry." Like I really had no tinnitus. I said, "It's all good. Trust me. We had our experience." We go into this little airport, and I see the head inspector guy who had been inspecting this other plane. And I said, "Let me ask you a question." I said, "That other plane they were looking at." I said, What was wrong with it? Like what?" He says, "Well, there was a little nick in the propeller, like a small nick in the propeller." I said, "And a nick in the propeller? What's the?" So he says, "Well, the propeller spins at a revolution of 660 kilometers per whatever second, hour, I don't know, whatever, right? It's spinning around." He says, "If at those speeds there's a nick," he says, "the nick could splinter." He said, "And then what will happen?" He says, "If it splinters, the propeller blade at that speed will break off." I says, "And then what happens?" He says, "Well, then the propeller will dislodge." I said, "And then?" He says, "Well, then most likely because of the gravitational pull," he says, "the engine will bottom out." I said, "And then?" He goes, "And then you fall to the ground, like you crash." I couldn't believe it. I said, "Wow." I go out to that plane. I'll never forget. I walk back out to the plane. And I put my hand where, the spot where he showed me, and you can't even see it. But you rub your finger on the edge of the propeller blade, you can feel a tiny nick. And it's one of the things they do is they make sure that there's no. And I thought to myself at the time, I was like, I don't know where this little tiny chip went, this little tiny piece. But wherever you are on this runway, wherever you are, I said, you have no idea what an important role you play in this big plane. That's what I thought to myself. Tiny little chip, a tiny little piece, barely visible. But if that little piece is not there, in its right place, the whole thing falls apart. And I think it's such an important mashal for all of us. We look at ourselves, I'm a tiny little piece in this massive universe of 8 billion people. What role do I play? If that was true, you wouldn't be on this earth.